So I drove my ass out to a theater that would play it, by God, and I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, this is very obviously the best movie of 2022 so far, and several actors and actresses in it should obviously be in considerations for the Oscars, even though the Oscars are stupid and terrible in the first place, and I thought we already agreed about that, but whatever. What did I think of it? My least favorite thing about Everything Everywhere All at Once is probably the name. It's not a bad name for a film, I just don't like saying it. I just don't like that the movie isn't prolific enough to have reached a wide enough audience that for us as Western society to have collectively decided how to abbreviate it to say it faster. So I'm just gonna keep saying the entire long-ass name and feeling like an asshole the whole time. After watching it, I definitely understand a lot more. I understand what everyone else has been saying about it, but I also simultaneously understand why, it's rated 97%, but also why the director of the movie said that it was being overhyped. And obviously he was, half joking, but the level of quality in this movie is usually found in more abstract, thought-provoking pieces like Parasite. You never see a movie this good where the message of the film is extremely clear and fairly easily consumable, I'll talk about this more as we go, but, it doesn't have the most airtight plot. It's not going to reach, BoJack levels of character writing or social commentary or anything. It's a dope-ass action-adventure movie with some relatively simple but heartfelt themes and traditionally powerful moments, It's like a Marvel movie, but,
triple, quadruple, million, double, billion
times better. These are the kinds of movies that are extremely interesting to critique. Most of the time, when someone talks about some masterpiece, some height of cinema, they're usually arguing on the basis that something is extremely emotionally resonant and or extremely thematically rich. Something with some complex, multi-layered story with heavy and complex themes beyond what you get from most movies. In the meanwhile, there are plenty of other types of movies and genres that have their own unique appeals, but never get the same recognition, right? We consume, we have an action movie, right? Purely just a dope-ass action movie. When has that ever, won Best Picture, for instance? I mean, is having dope-ass action any less valid of a reason to think a movie is amazing and extremely well made than a different film with dope-ass subtextual multi-layered storytelling? What about a comedy movie that is so goddamn hilarious it exceeds its value as a comedy even more so than, Titanic exceeds as a drama? I run into this issue with a lot of stuff I like. Our societal talking points regarding high art are totally structured around this shit, man. We don't really have established communication tools for expressing value in other means, at least on a pop cultural level. For instance, my current video game, as I've mentioned many times on the channel, is Being a Dick. It's a fucking visual novel. But I don't have the vocabulary to explain why it's so good compared to other games that also have great storytelling, that are thematically rich and complex in their messaging, their meta-commentary, their character writing, etc. How do I find the words to say that Being a Dick is better than them and I like it more than them because it's, really funny and fun and has a great vibe, and everything is better than all of them because it's just so fucking good at doing that? Everything is likable. It's just a good time with characters that are easy to invest in and have fun with. We're trained to think that kind of shit just sounds shallow, right? It can't possibly compete with the rich and heavy narrative of something like, fucking Last of Us or Spec Ops or whatever. We really don't have well-established metrics for these sorts of appeals when it comes to comparing what is generally considered higher art. Everyone, myself included, we all have this kind of arrogant assumption of what constitutes art. The upper echelon of art is almost exclusively perceived based on its thematic value. Sure, there are other elements of quality, right? Cinematography, editing, and such, but usually these are also judged based on how they contribute to that pretentious thematic resonance, right? What if a movie has god-tier cinematography and editing, but it uses them in service of a really fucking funny comedy and baller action set piece? That's the case with Everything Everywhere All at Once. This movie is like Danganronpa style goofy, but not in a parody sense like that. It's just goofy as fuck, you know? The costume design, the plot events, the sequences are all super goofy. Multiple fight scenes in the movie feature people getting murdered by sex toys. The IRS is one of the main antagonistic forces of the multiverse. The villain is basically Junko Enoshima. Like, literally, I'm not even joking. She's an all-powerful, enigmatic being that has become bored of reality, and as a result, she changes her personality and attitude on a whim, and she does a bunch of goofy shit, like changing character. It's fucking incredible. I lack the vocabulary and media literacy to describe the most important aspects of the quality of this film. I don't know how to articulate how cool and fun and exciting the action is, or how energetic the editing is, how tonally enthralling all the wacky shit is, how endearing everything is. It's just it's a jam fucking packed film. There's so much shit happening in every frame, every edit, you know. It's laden with so much extra detail and shit that's only on screen for maybe a few frames, and yet they still felt compelled to make something unique and creative and eye-catching with it, and so on and so forth. It's chock full of goodiness. I don't really have criticisms of this movie, but I do think that some people might counter-argument my statement that this movie is not very thematically rich. And obviously, of course, that's going to be subjective based on people's past experience with media. So I'll break down why I don't think the storytelling is the core component of it. Spoilers ahead, by the way. I think Waymond obviously has the most powerful scene in the movie, and, I don't think this movie comes across as overly simplistic or dull in the writing. I think it's a human level of complexity that makes it work better than some cookie-cutter, obvious thematic storytelling in other movies. But at the end of the day, the movie is still a mostly saccharine resolution to just a general nihilism conflict. Oh, nothing matters, so cherish the small moments that do mean something. Cherish the life you're living. Embrace conflict and chaos instead of trying to avoid it, etc. You know, probably the thematic message that will be the most novel relative to the other stuff is Waymond's kindness and silliness and hope being construed as deliberate and necessary optimism rather than as incompetently naive as it's originally misunderstood. You know, Evelyn was rejecting Waymond's happiness and cheerfulness and silliness on the basis that it didn't matter and didn't meaningfully improve their lives, that it was a naive misunderstanding of their shitty situation. Her nihilism could be combated once she realized that these are the things she should embrace rather than scrutinize. It was her sense of ego over her perception of nihilism that made her view Waymond as incompetent. All in all, the themes of the movie are not even close to the most complex and nuanced and unique of any film I've seen. You know, they're relatively saccharine messages that I have already grown past in my fucking middle school years. I think the conflict between Evelyn and Joy was pretty underdeveloped. I loved the Waymond climax, and they had a lot of interactions, but the emotional Joy conflict resolution, I was just kind of confused and had no attachment or belief in the build-up whatsoever. I had not seen any development of Joy's nihilism or conflict with her mother to buy into any of the emotions going on, and I felt nothing at the emotional climax, which was kind of fucking weird. The plot is very, seat-of-the-pants type shit, you know? It's heavily contrived all over the place, as multiverse plots tend to be. This plot has a lot of holes when you really start to think about it. When I was leaving the theater talking with my friends who saw it with me, I almost forgot what the inciting conflict of the movie even was. I forgot what, the problem was that people were trying to solve, because the ending really makes it feel like something else. The ending really makes it feel like Joy, this is just a metaphor for Joy leaving or, killing herself or whatever. You know, the others are trying to save her. It feels like this is just something Joy is doing by herself that will only have consequences on herself and, I guess, their relationship. Maybe what she's doing would also kill everyone else and destroy the entire multiverse, but it doesn't seem like that works in a metaphorical sense. It's clearly, very obviously and ham-fistedly portrayed as Joy going off on her own, abandoned, defeated, like Evelyn was when she left her father. This totally contradicts most of the film, where they're like, oh, the villain is hurting the multiverse, waging war on the multiverse, like she's doing something that will hurt everyone. There's a very early scene where Waymond, Alpha Waymond, says something to Evelyn about how the villain is sapping the joy or like life or whatever out of everything, all the multiverse. He's like, oh, your coffee tastes worse. Have you noticed? Things are just like sucky, like getting more and more shitty in general. This is never brought up again at any point in the entire movie. Even though this was the only reason Evelyn agreed to join and agreed that there was a problem that needed stopping in the first place. This is plot vital because it drives all of the Alpha Timeline people who want to stop Evelyn from being everywhere, as well as Joy, which is half of the film's runtime. Joy's plan is messy and not very structurally sound and clear, retroactively. Like, if Joy wanted Evelyn to be everywhere, what was her plan exactly? Why was she sending her goons to just beat the shit out of her and or kill her? It seems like for most of the story, Joy's goons are just trying to kill Evelyn. Is this some weird, like, bullshit, like, contrived-ass reverse psychology thing where she actually wanted Evelyn to fight back and thus stumble into becoming everywhere? That's fucking stupid and makes no sense. Why does Joy even have goons in the first place? Who are these fucking people? Maybe they're just generally nihilistic assholes like Joy is? I guess that makes sense, based on some of the followers that she has, like the IRS lady. A mechanical question I have is, when you transfer your consciousness to a new universe, if you're wearing like the headset thing, I guess, like that's how you maintain control, you know, like you get to be the transceiver in the interaction. Like when Alpha Waymond takes over our Waymond has no memory of this happening once Alpha Waymond leaves. Alpha Waymond just literally jumps out to control his body. That sometimes happens with Evelyn. Like, she'll get to control a different version of herself, but she can also take their skills and mind their whole mind, you know, back with her. The weird thing is, if the minds are supposed to be melding, why does the other Evelyn not exist as an entity in this equation? Like, I would think that it wouldn't just be their skills, quote-unquote, that transfer over, but it'd have to be, like, all of their memories of their entire life, all their philosophies, their thought processes, and how their entire personality would change, right? If she envelops a whole different version of herself into her own mind, right? Another big plot hole. Why is Evelyn the chosen one? Moreover, like, what the fuck does that mean? There's a weird explanation Waymond gives for why she's valuable and what makes her, like, talented at multiverse jumping, where she says that she's useless at everything. But what the fuck is a chosen one? Like, Waymond explains that a powerful warrior of light or hope or whatever needs to beat a powerful evil. But where did you get that information? Literally, what are you talking about? Where the fuck did that come from? Why do you think they need a warrior who can beat Joy? Like one person who is the ultimate powerful multiverse person. Where did you get this information, Waymond? What's the source, bro? I guess they know that Joy is looking for someone, but they have no idea who or why. Waymond literally just made up the rest of that shit on his own. It confuses me how the Alpha Timeline people even think they can contest Joy, like what their plan is either. Like, Joy is literally unkillable, right? You can kill her in a particular universe and stop her from having influence in that universe, but I guess the multiverse is still being drained of happiness and life and whatever by her existence of the bagel. I mean, that's what Evelyn said. Evelyn asked, well, if she's just hurting some universes, but not all of them, you know, like, aren't the other ones just fine? And Waymond's excuse was, no, it's not that simple. It hurts everyone. I guess. What is their plan to win? Evelyn's idea of also being everywhere is the only thing that even kind of makes sense. Like, she would have to be everywhere to contest Joy, who is everywhere. But I don't understand why Evelyn is the only one to think of this and do this. They say a lot of shit about how Evelyn would be fried, quote-unquote. They say that word a lot, fried. Like, oh, you would be fried from a big jump normally. But what does that even mean? We know that the Alpha Timeline Joy was pushed until she was everywhere. You know, Evelyn's daughter was pushed until she was everywhere, and that's like the inciting incident. So clearly Joy was able to become everywhere without it killing her. So why not anyone else? Why has no one else tried to do this thing that Evelyn is currently doing? If it's the only idea that anyone even suggests that might be able to stop Joy, if Joy can do it, why can't anyone else? Or is Joy also special, like Evelyn is supposedly is, where that they're both, like, uniquely able to become everywhere without their brains being fried, whatever that means? That would be weird. Also, Joy can do things that Evelyn literally can't, even though they should functionally have the same... Like based on the logic of the film, right? Joy should just have access to all knowledge and all skill, and I guess the physical body as well, perhaps. There's some parts where they literally alter their physical bodies in other universes. But they should be able to access that shit in any version of yourself in the multiverse. But she can also just do things that, like, controlling the universe. Like, she can summon objects and outfits out of nowhere at will. She makes someone's head explode into confetti at one point. It seems like she can just literally alter time and space at will, but that's not how they describe the mechanics of the universe. The plot is super not clearly defined and fleshed out. Mechanically speaking, the rules of the universe don't make sense. The plot is heavily contrived. It has a lot of plot holes. One or two of these things might have actually been explained at some point, and I think a lot of it is at least intentionally, or like at least excused by the fact that the story largely revolves around portraying the chaos of life, right? Like Wayman's big "I don't know what's going on" scene is a clear indication that a lot of this incoherence in the movie is probably by design or otherwise at least acceptable, for the story they're trying to tell. But again, none of that matters, I just wanted to preemptively contradict people who might say, oh, the plot is amazing, it's the most, like, thematically rich story I've ever consumed, blah, 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 because the storytelling really is not the highlight of the film. It excels and slays and fucking dominates at so many things, but the actual plot isn't one of them. And like I said, I don't think it has to be. I don't think that's an insult. I don't think that's an issue at all. This movie is an amazing action-adventure comedy, and that makes it just as good as any other film with heavier things or more logically sound plots, This is also just one of those films that really flexes incredible acting as well, because it involves so much of the same actor playing totally different versions of themselves in the multiverse, like switching on a dime to a different flair of their performance. They all do an incredible job with language as well. They have most of the actors going in and out of Mandarin, I think, and English mostly, capturing the speaking patterns and experience of people who are not 100% comfortable in one language or the other and sometimes lean back on their native tongues. Every actor gives a standout performance. Even the relatively unimportant IRS lady is just all over this movie and has such a great energy and playfulness to this role of this sunken auditor. The movie is also heavily scene-based in its structure, which is really fun for people like me. I love that shit, man. I'm very open about my love for episodic storytelling in TV shows. I love when episodes are very distinct from each other and not just arbitrary ways of separating what could essentially just be a really long movie, like most TV shows are. This movie has so many distinct scenes. One scene is totally different from another one. You will come out of the theater and literally not be able to keep track of every single uniquely cool, dope fucking scene that you loved. Each scene is super identifiable. They all engage with totally different creative ideas. It's fucking rad. Now, if I were to staple on one last topic to this video that kind of relates to this movie and other reviews of it, I have some words to say about absurdist humor. You know me, I don't really like to make an essay on something unless I have a particularly worthwhile thing to say. So I try to combine my reviews with my thoughts on a particular aspect of media analysis and review. I've seen quite a large number of people in recent time being extremely harsh and flippant towards absurdist humor. Literally twice in the last week alone, at the time of this writing at least, I've heard totally different people talk about different media as, quote-unquote, it's basically lol-so-random Reddit humor, which is such a ridiculous generalization to me, it boggles my mind. Absurdism, otherwise known as incongruity theory of comedy, is not only one of the four major pillars of the commonly accepted understanding of humor and why humans find things funny, it is built into the fucking human experience, man. If you look at almost anything in the world that you've ever found remotely funny, you laughed at it, it made you smirk, you simply recognized the wit and tone of something without having a visible reaction, whatever, man. Whatever you find funny and you would categorize as being effective humor, it probably has an element of incongruity. 99.9% of internet memes are heavily laden with absurdism. A lot of, fucking people that don't know better will tell you that irony, right? On a low level of comprehension, you'll hear this a lot, that irony is a core component of effective comedy, that we naturally expect one thing and we get something else. This is just a small misunderstanding. This is simply a much more easily digestible form of incongruity, which is the actual pillar of comedy. Irony is funny because it is a particular type of incongruity. Irony is funny because it breaks your perception of what something should be. That is the same as all things that are absurd. When I listen to reviewers talk about stuff like Everything Everywhere All at Once, and they say that most of the humor's, just random things happening, lol so random, haha, it is an astonishing lack of comprehension for the foundations of humor. Bro, fucking every piece of comedy is random, man. The only difference is the scale and how much you've trained yourself to handle it all at once. There is nothing wrong with increasing the degree of incongruity in a piece of comedy. The comedic elements simply sharing a degree of incongruity, being all lumped together into the same categories, like saying, all stories that have strong emotional appeals are all of the same. They're the same as each other because they all just keep pushing the same emotional angle. This is also closely related to why I never trust anyone on their word when they say that a tone is contradictory. Like, when people complain that a serious moment is too close to a comedic moment or something, because I've found that 90% of the time, they're talking about a scene that acknowledges the fact that a human can experience more than one simple emotion at a time. Something can be consumed in a multi-layered way where both avenues uplift the other. Something is both serious but also comedic. Will obviously heighten the comedy because it's funny that as such a serious moment is being made fun of and turned into a gag. And it lends a suspension of disbelief to the drama that adds important levity and prevents scenes from feeling saccharine and artificial, and it reflects the reality that things can often be interpreted by people in both serious and comedic ways, as tragedies in reality often are. Look at, the early seasons of The Simpsons, for instance. Comedy is mixed with drama and emotion the entire time, but it often leads to or ends with this genuine heartfelt sequence or moments. The tone is so gag heavy, you almost expect some heartfelt scene to have the rug pulled out from under you to make a joke out of some tender moment. But the early Simpsons fully embraced the real heart and soul of the characters. The moments where you could tell that under the conflicts and the gags and the shenanigans, they were a real loving family with real human concerns and resolutions, and they felt human. The comedy and passion complement each other when structured effectively. A lot of the time, when I hear people complain about tonal dissonance nowadays, it's usually a situation where the person just wants the media to be something that it just isn't trying to be. This is most obvious in my experience with Danganronpa. A lot of fans want to pretend like the thing is one big serious drama, when it is so obviously largely a parody and a deconstruction. So when it's doing its actual purpose of being a very self-aware, ironic meta-commentary featuring a heavy degree of genre-trapping comedy, they think the comedy is distracting from the seriousness of a dramatic scene, when in reality, they are letting the scene distract them from what is clearly the actual main purpose of the media, to be comedy, or a mixture of the two, or both simultaneously in different interpretations. This, of course, goes back to the problem of people in pop culture just automatically assuming that all media is supposed to be taken literally and at face value. And people drastically overvaluing the literal plot and very simple perception of what conflict and stakes are supposed to look like, quote-unquote, even when it clearly is not the focus of a story or the writing. Heavy absurdist and improvisational humor, especially, operate on a much looser tone than most comedy, which simply features, like a joke, just like a joke, where you can, hear it, you immediately understand it, you get, whatever gag it is. There's not really much more to do with it. You might laugh at it a few more times, but you get it. You get the joke. There's no more potential for additional humor from it. Improv humor is all about imagination. You have to think expansively, not reductively. You can't just wait for the joke to tell you its simple punchline. You have to actually think about the subtext of the absurdity and find various angles where it creates irony against the established world, the established expectations. Absurdism has a much higher ceiling of appeal. It is widely open to interpretation using its loose tone and subtextual criticality, which becomes more comedic as the tonal irony of whatever elements were included are more closely examined. Irony is also vital to the infinite cycle of open interpretation. Something needs to have a self-ironic tone for you to not only laugh at the absurdity of a joke, but also the idea that a writer thought of something so bizarre, so unjoke-like as their joke. A joke falling flat or being awkward or strange or unclear but self-aware of that failure is itself another joke. So anything conveyed with a self-ironic tone allows the viewer to consume it on whatever level they so choose. This is vital, not just for comedy, but for storytelling as a whole. You don't want anything in your writing to feel too simple, too obvious, too limited, to feel like the viewer can just see something and totally get it and then be bored of it because there's nothing left to interpret from it, nothing left to gather. It's just so on the nose what the purpose is. Self-ironic presentation allows for a much greater complexity and interpretation to occur, and sometimes the presentation of an idea can be equal parts genuine and self-ironic, as both are technically true in one way or another. Self-irony is like the moral ambiguity of all fucking tonal writing. It simply adds an entire plane of interpretation with no clear endpoint that expands the feel of whatever is being conveyed by a totally undefinable amount. A joke that doesn't land on a first or even a second viewing can land later on because it's not so cut and dried with the limits the joke has, if it's self-ironic. Let me give you the best example of this from my own experience recently, in recent years. One of the jokes that I just stupidly giggle at from the best Rick and Morty episode, the Rick Lantis mix-up.
I guess I wish I had something cooler than this dumbass surfer necklace.
Originally, I didn't laugh at the dumbass surfer necklace line. It didn't strike me in really any way. It meant nothing to me. It didn't have like a punchline. It didn't have a clear punchline like a lot of the other jokes or anything. However, since it is clearly told facetiously with a constant level of self-irony and genre parody as the whole show is, I eventually found it funny. That it existed at all, like thinking about it subtextually. Each detail of the gag is incongruous, Why does Morty take such a petty tone when he says this line? Why is it delivered in this way? What is the subtext of this? What could it even be implying, even as a joke? Why was this joke put here? It feels totally out of place next to a lot of the other lines, and it's just a bizarre line for everything else in this tone and narrative, and the incongruity of that, in a meta sense, is the interpretation of its humor. It's hard to explain why I find it charming and funny now, since I can't just simply explain a punchline or anything, but, that's the power of self-irony and improvisational content. That's the value of incongruity in things just being off-kilter, not lining up perfectly, and being fucking just weird. I got tired and no longer laugh at all the obvious jokes with obvious punchlines in, those shows in that episode. I still fucking laugh at all I have is this dumbass surfer necklace. Anyways, all that aside, I am fucking sick of hearing people consume extremely goofy, absurdist shit and then just complain or generalize it as, oh, it's lol-so random Reddit humor. It really butters my biscuits. This movie is so good, you guys. Go fucking watch it. Appreciate the work that went into every aspect of it. All angles. Appreciate the editing. Appreciate the acting. Appreciate just look at it from each angle and be more appreciative. That's all for me. See ya.